sometimes there be newer writers that are like, well, I have 4 half-written scripts. I'm like, well, that's nothing. You have nothing. You need a complete story. Even if it's bad, even if it structurally doesn't work or whatever doesn't work, it's good to push yourself through the whole thing. I won for a TV pilot called Dead Drop. And it's a kind of a younger alias version of the story, I guess, of a TV show, but it was an ensemble. So then it's about a 14-year-old girl that finds out that her dad's actually used to be a spy. It's like a kind of a spy in hiding. And she is sent to this special group home where she finds kids just like her. And they figure out that all their parents are connected, and that was what the series kicks off the series, and that her mom is indeed alive and it's also a spy. So and dead drop, the definition of a dead drop is when someone leaves something for someone else to pick up. So when both agents are called into the field, the kids are dropped off at this group home, and so the other parent theoretically would come in and pick them up. So awesome. Yeah, so that's so that was it was a finalist in Screencraft's television pilot contest, and I rewrote it or polished it up and submitted for the fellowship, and so that's what got me into the fellowship. And what was the other part of the question? Like just my experience in Screencraft and.
Well, I actually, if you don't mind, I kind of would love to know. I know I looked on your website. You're working on all these different projects. You have a bunch of accomplishments. Seems like you write in multiple genres, and you don't just write pilots, and you write features too. So with this idea, we can get to the Screencraft experience, but I'm curious, how do you even choose if an idea is fit to be like a pilot, to be a series, versus if you'd rather do it as a movie? That's always one of those things, that questions that we get all the time.
Well, it's based on the characters and the situation too. I actually turned Dead Drop into a feature. And the feature got me into another program, but I stripped away all the ensemble. It was just a heroine's journey and just followed the main girl through the whole thing. So I like working in different genres. I typically, my go-to is sci-fi and action just because I love it, but I'm a secret rom-com girl as well. I will binge watch any rom-com, or comedy TV. But all my work, no matter what genre it is or what medium it is, and this was not by planned, but I think once you get into writing and start getting a few scripts under your belt, you realize there's common traits in all of them. And for me, it's family and loss. Now, loss could be sad, but it can also be funny, and it can be, and also loss can kind of cover a fear of loss. And I think when a character has fear of loss, they make very poor decisions, which could be funny or it could be dramatic, or it could be like, don't do that, and so it can offer different, so the genre becomes secondary. It's what the characters are kind of going through, and I think any good comedy has a little bit of heartache in it and stuff like that. So, and then any comedy has some kind of, for them, it's sometimes, for the characters, it's not comedy, it's it's their life, and it's dramatic in their perspective. So I really focus on the characters and the kind of story I want to tell. And obviously, if it's a certain genre, like a sci-fi, you have to, there's certain things that are in it that make it sci-fi, and that becomes world building, and I love to world build. And then usually, I'm writing something now that, I thought I had it all planned out. I had an 18-page, treatment. I have an outline. I never outline that much. And I started writing it, and I'm like, it needs another twist. Something's missing. You can kind of feel it when you write it. And then you kind of find another mythology. And I think there's always why is this story happening now, and why this character, and why is it happening, why you're telling it. And then sometimes you find stuff while you're writing it, and you're like, wait, this character story fits in a bigger story, and so then you kind of weave that into the story. and make your story more layers. And the more layers I think you can throw in, the better. And the more twists and turns, it becomes fun. And yeah.
So you mentioned family and loss. This is just so interesting to me, getting into kind of the more nitty gritty stuff. But you mentioned family and loss are themes that you're always exploring in all of your work. Well, first off, what do you think it is that makes you interested in those themes? And then secondly, how do you approach developing themes specific to certain projects? I really love to get into that a little bit.
Well, for Dead Drop, I had just lost my father. And so I wrote about a girl that's losing her dad. That happens in the opening scene of the pilot. He gets kidnapped and she's left all alone. And I think no matter when you lose somebody in life, obviously I was an adult when this happened, but it makes you feel like a little kid. You feel helpless. And I was unbelievably close to both my parents. And so when that happened, I wrote about a girl that had lost her family, and then always searching for that, like to fill that void. And so she finds a new family with the kids that she finds. When I rewrote the story into a feature, I had just lost my mom. And so I set the feature it starts and ends in Beaufort, South Carolina, and which you don't really see, like the South, like movies. I love when movies are set in the South, but it's not about the South, so you can kind of show a different thing. And Beaufort's like a little town that's on the water and whatnot. So like I had the opening action scenes, like, involves a dock, a boat, like all this other kind of stuff. But it was kind of like a little wink nod to my mom, where she starts in Beaufort, has this huge adventure, and she ends in Beaufort, but she's a completely different person. Wow. And so I think for that, like, I've lost most of the family that I grew up with, but I don't have a family yet of my own. So I think that's that kind of like, maybe like I'm striving to like fill that void, or, that kind of stuff. But then I also, wrote another, that was in Austin this like a couple years ago. That script, Company Man, the character, both of them have experienced loss, but one is filling a void and one is like move past it. And it's like kind of like how do you move past it, and how do you come into your own, and you take that experience and then and learn from it, and you grow from it. So I think that's kind of where that started. It didn't mean to, but like I had been thinking about the story for a while, and then after my dad passed away, then I kind of dove in and started writing it. But then I look at other things that I wrote before that, and I'm like, oh, yep, there's loss. There's like, family. There's always like, I have family in a lot of it because of people that aren't necessarily related, but they form a family, which I think living years in LA, I have family, here, like that I definitely consider family.
First off, I'm really sorry for your loss. That's rough.
Thank you. They were, it's fine. I'm in my, adulthood and stuff, but thank you. Yeah. But that's where it comes from. I think every writer kind of finds what makes them tick and kind of what stirs their emotions and what they need to get out, or it's sometimes wish fulfillment, and disguised as a action story or a sci-fi story, So.
I think it's I think this is actually such a valuable thing to talk about, because I do think from people I've talked to, I have friends that are kind of just getting into this too. I'm just really kind of getting into screenwriting myself. And I think a lot of people when they're first starting out aren't so self-aware of those themes, and especially like self-aware enough to be able to kind of use the craft as therapy, which is kind of like, it sounds like you're using the stuff that you're going through personally as fuel for your writing, which is awesome, of course. So it's so nice to hear like you just being so open, talking about that stuff. So you were mentioning how important the characters are for TV, and kind of character is how you determine if you want to make it a feature or like a series. But do you have a process for even coming up with characters, or how you actually get into the details of developing character?
No, I don't have a process. Well, here's the thing. I don't outline a lot. I like to outline in 3 pages, and it sounds weird, but first act, second act, third act. Sometimes I know when a story is more about the character than that one episode, right? So, and that kind of clicks my head of like that would be a great tale that it wouldn't be wrapped up in 90 minutes. Like, oh, we could dive in and there's all these other ancillary characters floating about that, that you could just dive into each little story in more detail. I think that kind of tips it into TV. And if it's more higher concepts and bigger, I tend to do a feature. But as far as like and I talk about like, I don't like to over outline only because I feel like it gets stale to me, but there have been moments that like I know it's a feature when I can just, if I had all the time in the world and caffeine in the world so I could stay awake, if I could sit down and not interrupted, I could just pump out the first act. Like, just don't even disturb me. And if I could stay up for like however many hours and do it, and I know the last scene, that's a movie. Like, I know that's a movie. And then sometimes I stop after that and then I kind of more detail it out. The reason why I have a detailed outline for the thing that I'm writing now is because I had started developing it with a company, and so I kind of when you're working with other people, you have to flush everything out. But it's not my favorite way to do it. Like I think you come up with surprises and stuff like that more for me.
How do you start? How do you start? Like when you, or first off, just I would like, how do you capture ideas for you? What is it about ideas, or what is it about idea that gets you to say, okay, you know what, I want to commit to turning this into some type of story? Well, how do you even, we get that as much as it might seem like easy to some people, like we get that question all the time. Like, I just don't know how to, I don't have an idea. I have all these ideas and I don't know how to choose. So what is your process for kind of landing on an idea in the first place?
You know what, I'm trying to see if there's a book that I have. I'll find it after we talk, I'm sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can put it in like the
but it's normally I find a situation or something that I'm like, and who would that, and then I start asking myself questions. I think asking yourself questions like, who would that happen to? Okay, who would you think that would happen to? And then who would be, you would not be the opposite person, and that's probably who you should write the story about. And then why is it, and why it'd be uncomfortable and worthy of exploration. But yeah, I can't, I don't have, I don't fill out like a forms and like all that. I just kind of come up with like, a situation, and then I kind of world build from there. Gotcha. Like Company Man is about what happens 20 years past the zombie apocalypse. Like, we've seen so many zombie movies, but what's the world 20 years like? We always see like the abandoned cars on the highway. Well, someone's going to have to clean those up. Like, what happened? Who's that guy? And that's kind of how Company Man started. You know what I mean? Like, so I was watching a zombie movie and I'm like, God, every zombie movie has abandoned cars on a highway, and that's the famous like thing from The Walking Dead, like the long shot of my hometown, Atlanta, like the abandoned cars. Okay, well, who's going to take those cars? Who do they get cleaned? Are they reused? Like, that's what started my idea of Company Man. And then I'm like, okay, who's this guy? And
wow, that sounds like, it sounds like you're just me listening. It sounds like you're just very much driven by your curiosity. Like, you just get curious, asking all those questions. That's a really good tip for people, is like, if you do come up with an idea, start asking a lot of questions. Like,
and ask yourself questions too. It's like, what's on your mind at that moment? Like, what do you need to maybe get out? Like, because I think it's, I always, for my process, and everyone's different, and I'm jealous of the people that can be like, I wrote a first draft. Here, read it. My true first draft is a vomit draft. And it's not, I call it a 3/4 draft. Yeah. And then I go back through and then I put the special sauce on it. And it's like these details of like, what does, and like asking what is your character like when they get nervous, or what does, so like if there's a moment that they're waiting in the script, like waiting in line, waiting, whatever. What are they doing? They're not just standing there, like it's like, what's their nervous tick or what's, little things like that you start peppering in. I think that, and that sometimes comes from personal stuff, but sometimes comes from people I know, but it's also specific to the story. And I think that those little layers start making your story really kind of stand out. And the more specific you can be, the better. So to answer a question like, how do you come up with the characters? Like, yeah, but it's just all these little questions. And it's like, and then, what moves the story forward? And, there's that cliche of kill your darlings, but like, what truly moves the story? Do you need the scene? And what is the character getting out of that scene to propel the story forward? And sometimes it doesn't need to be for me, I feel like it doesn't need to be a story point. It might be a character emotional point that they need to experience so they are motivated for the next scene. So
I mean, that's you hear that all the time, kill your darlings, but I love what you say about it doesn't just have to be like plot, it can be characters. Like that type of stuff is so important, even if it's not exactly plot. Like a character reaction, it directly correlates to something that happens in the plot. Like those things are very important. So again, kind of about the theme, because it seems to me like you are very driven by your curiosity, and it just seems like you love the spontaneous nature of like letting things kind of happen as you're writing. I'm assuming, is that kind of how do you let yourself go wherever it goes once you start writing? Like it just goes wherever?
I have an idea. Like, I mean, when I have, so like I said, like for a feature, like I could split it out on 3 pieces of paper.
Yeah.
Because I like to see the story overall. If some people love note cards, I would be lost. I'd be like, oh my God, there's so many pieces floating around. Yeah. I can't. Are we on A, B? What's happening? Like I need to look. Like I need to pin it up on. I have a board right here, so I could see the start and the end, like the whole story. And then in my head, there's like, oh yeah, that boat. I'm going to do that, like in my head. And oh, and we're going to be in the warehouse there. Yeah, that's when that, but then sometimes I'll write one word underneath it, and that's a whole moment or a scene or a beat, like whatever. But so I have it mapped out generally, but like then there's stuff that pops up like when you are writing it and when you're really in a flow, it's like your characters you're just taking it down. They're in your head speaking. And so then you get to a point where, you kind of go off a little bit, but I always kind of come back to my general, like dotted outline.
I like that. I love the 3-page, 1 act per page. That's a really, I want to try that. Like, I feel like that's a really good way to kind of break it down with just enough where you're not like getting every detail, but you have a good map. I'm kind of similar with, I don't like too many details because then it just, it felt like, I could start to get lost. But what do you think is the main thing that drives you? Like, I do want to ask you about this because you seem like you work in visual effects too, right? Like you work on all these different things. You're working in multiple different fields. You seem very productive to me. Like you seem like you get a lot done and you do a lot of work. And one thing I do like to talk about is like, how do you stay motivated? Because that's one of the biggest problems that we come across with people like that ask us questions. Like writer's block, I struggle with procrastination, those types of things. But before that, like what is it that's kind of really driving you when you're actually sitting at your computer typing? Is it like the emotion of what you're trying to portray, or is it like the idea or like the characters that you're trying to bring to life? Like, can you pin it down to like one thing that's kind of primarily driving you?
To have a script done. Like, I mean, to have it done, have a finished story. It's to get through that vomit draft, to be honest. Because once I have that, I love just taking my time and putting the special stuff on it, and the enhancing the character moments, getting deeper into a conversation that I put in, or, dialogue moment that I put in there, or whatever it is. What drives me to write, I mean, so a lot of my situation is a little different. My day job, I do work in visual effects, which means if I'm working a 12-hour day, I'm working 60-hour weeks. So a lot of times I get my writing time taken away. So for me to have time off, which I have, like right now I'm off, until like the spring, I guess, and writing. So like I work my day job because I work a lot, and then I can take chunks of time off, which is great. And so while and I hear this all the time from writers, they're like, well, I have a job, I have this. I'm like, yeah, but you got to think about, like, you had a job before you entered that contest. So how did you write that one? So that's how you're going to do it this one. If you've done it once, you can do it again. But so when I had a more 9-to-5 job, I would set a schedule, a writing schedule. And I would write, some people like to write before their jobs, sometimes at night. I think it's kind of have to go with the flow, because you don't know what life throws at you. But sometimes it's easier to do it before and after. And even if it's 15 minutes a day, that's fine. And I don't write every day. I know that's like a no-no. Like everyone's like, oh, you have to write every day. But for me, I physically can't sometimes. So I'm very motivated when I have time off to get stuff done. I mean, I've been in the WGA library every day last week writing, like it was a job. Like I have to report there when it's 11 a.m. when they open, and I stayed till 6. And there, you can ask the librarians, they saw me do this. Like, I think, I mean, like, I was like, I don't know. And like, I have the outline, and I just kind of, but it's hard. But I think, make yourself sit at your desk and stay in it. It's easy to get up and be like, oh, I'm stuck, I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
Just push through that hour and just stay there and think about your story. Because I mean, a lot of writing is like staring at the wall and thinking about it, right? And then, and while I'm on production a lot, I try to outline, not like over outline, but like, flush stuff out. Yeah. So when I do have chunks of time off, or like a whole weekend, I just cancel everything. I know I'm going to write the whole time. I have it all right there, and I know what I'm doing, and I know where I'm going to go with the story. And I try to like kind of release the whole, it needs to be perfect. It doesn't. It just needs to get into final draft. Yeah. So, or whatever program you use. So then I have my pages that I will walk around, and these pages could, like, they're so folded and whatever, but if I have, 30 minutes at lunch on set or whatever, or if I'm waiting in a doctor's office, or I don't, whatever it is, I can pull them out with a pen and I can write on them. That's awesome. So those become gold, because then you sit down when you're tired and you're like, oh, I'm too tired to write, whatever, I'm putting in my own notes, and that gets you started. And that's and then you're writing, before you know it, you're writing. So that's kind of my plan of attack.
I love that. And so you actually have like physical paper that you put these notes on, because I feel like there's something to like the physicality of that type of stuff. Like it brings a different dimension of like emotion into it, rather than just on your computer.
I don't remember stuff I mean, I can type list all day, but I also handwrite list and stuff. And I think, so I don't know, everyone's different. Like my friend always writes with note cards, and I'm like, that would just blow my mind. I can't do it. But it's just finding your own thing. And people, I know a friend that's like, I'm going to write a script on my iPad. I'm like, why? But he wanted to do it. And so he had like a little keyboard that connected, and he's like, okay, like, like everyone tries different things for different projects, but I don't know.
To me, I just think that it feels like there is a level of precious, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but like it's more precious. I don't even know the word I'm trying to use, but sometimes when everything is just on your computer, it feels like it loses value a little bit, because like anything and everything can just be there. But when you have that physical thing that's separate, it just feels like a little bit more valuable, like in a sense. But I was going to ask you, I kind of wanted to go back to, or actually, you know what?
Oh, wait. Well, I never asked about theme though, too. What I'll say about theme, like if you want to know, like your message of like what you want to say about this piece, sometimes too, I go address theme again, like in that second draft or second pass through. Because my friend, he always talks about theme and whatever. And I used to kind of like, okay, yeah, whatever. And then I'm like, oh, wait, but the really good scripts stay on theme. And so when he was giving me notes once, we went scene by scene. And when you it might just be changing one line, but it's like, what is that theme? It does elevate the material. And so I've been taking my classes from friends' notes, and yeah, so if something's a little off or something's not working, or like, it's good to like put it down, come back, reread it. I'm a big thing of like printing it out, reading it in one sitting, and that's important, because then you go for on the ride in one thing. So if it's flowing, if it's working, if the second act is feeling too long or the first act is feeling, whatever it is, do it all in one sitting versus, I'm going to read 10, I have a half hour or whatever, block out a few hours. But then I look at it and it's everything going towards that one theme. Because sometimes it emerges as you write too. Like, you think you're writing about one thing, you're like, wait, this is really, about this other thing.
Yeah. I want to ask you this question. I love asking this question.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, there's people I talk to that don't do this and some that do. And I just love I'm always curious about people's process. But when you write, like it's time for you to actually type, do you read the whole script from the top to where you left off and then start from where you left off? Or do you only read like a few scenes up to where you are and then you keep typing?
Always know so when you sit down, no. So my thing, and I heard this like from a couple people on different panels. When I finish, like, I'm like, okay, I'm finishing for the day, I write 3 bullet points of where I'm going next. Like, and there's an outline, like you have your notes and all that, but I'm not talking about that. It's like more specific, like, make sure, I don't know, she picks up the envelope, or, I don't know whatever it is, like, or something it might not be a story point, but it's like a very specific beat and stuff. And then I write, like, if I'm feeling stuff like, oh, don't forget to do that. Like, I write notes to myself or whatever. So then I read maybe like not even a half a page. I know exactly what I'm doing the next day. Like, if I have those notes. Yeah.
I love that. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Just when you're finished, and I've heard a lot of people say the same thing, like leave yourself notes, because it kind of gets you going for that next day. And then I do wanted to get your philosophy of this to see what you think. But what do you think of writer's block? It's one of these things, we all talk about it. Some people love to say like writer's block doesn't exist. It's just something in your mind. But some people are very like Aaron Sorkin is kind of famously known to say like he just basically is in a constant state of writer's block. Like that's his normal thing. But what are your thoughts on writer's block?
I think it's an emotional block. I don't think it has anything to do with writer's block of the story. And probably if you have too big of a writer's block, I feel like you probably didn't think about the story you started writing too early, like you haven't thought about it. But I have emotional blocks, like where I will pace on the other side of this room divider. And I know, like, I had the whole day set to write, and I'm like, my computer's right there, and I'm thinking about it every second. I'll be watching TV, and it's just bugging. I'm not really enjoying the show because I'm like, oh, your computer is 5 feet away. What are you doing? Oh, and there's a reason why. And then once you sit down, you're like, once I sit down, usually I'm like, okay, this wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Yeah. But then I realize, or I immediately see a problem, and I'm like, and that's mentally kind of why I knew I didn't want to sit down. I knew I was going to hit this roadblock, like I'm in the story. But if you get too frustrated, but that's why I also say, like, just sit there, just make yourself sit there and stare at it for an hour. I know as frustrating as it is, or go for a walk. I used to have this mentor that she always said, you write in your head when you do other things. So that's like, and it's kind of, Aaron Sorkin mentions this too. He takes a shower. He's a big shower person. Yeah, he's like, I figure it out in the shower. I figure it out when I'm cleaning, or if I'm hiking, or if I'm walking, outside. And then you're like, okay, can't forget it. And then when I do that, I also get up from my desk, and this is ridiculous, but I pitch to an empty couch. Like, my neighbors probably think I'm crazy and talking to myself. And I talk it out. I'm like, okay, well, they're there, they're right here, and this needs to happen, and this needs to happen, but how are they going to get, and I'm like, pretending I'm like pitching it to a room. And then I just keep talking it out and my neighbors probably think I'm crazy. And then I kind of say it out. I'm like, oh wait, that does work. And then I pitch it again from the top. And then I'm like, okay, I kind of know what I'm doing. And then I write those like 2-3 sentence words, or like bullet points down. And then I kind of know where I'm going. And then I write that, or I write a version of that. That's kind of how I push through it. But it's usually something with me that I can't wrap my head around how to communicate what's in the movie in my head.
Yeah, I honestly love like everything you're saying, and it goes back to stuff you were saying earlier, which is like, it seems to me like being very emotional, and maybe a better word is passionate about what you're writing on. Something that I personally believe in it. Like, this is just something I've kind of learned about myself just over the years, is like, I feel like passion is kind of something that you can cultivate. It's kind of a discipline, passion. A lot of people think of it like passion will just strike you and then you can write for 6 hours. But to me, it's like, I feel like it's just more about the discipline, and everything that you've been saying is, I love it, because you're talking about, it's like you're creating this passion by writing these things, having this paper, writing these outlines, speaking out loud as if like you're pitching it. Like, all that stuff is like, it just makes that passion come up. So I really love that.
And if you're not passionate about the story, it's going to show on the page. So go write something else. Like, and then I say that like, where every writer should have more than one story. You're like, this is the one story. It's like, no, you're going to have like 10 million stories, But so it's always kind of helpful to have something else going too, like at different stages. If you're writing one, then start outlining another. And usually when you're kind of working on that other thing, you're like, oh, but know what would be great for that other thing? And they start kind of cross-pollinating.
That's awesome. I would love to well, actually, I'm curious, like, how long, like, when did you start getting into screenwriting? Were you working in the other field doing visual effects first, and then you kind of started screenwriting? Like, what was like your beginning to getting into screenwriting?
I was working for a producer. This is like years and years ago. I was in the studio system, and I had to give story notes, and I'm like, God, I want to be the person on the other side of this table and not, and so I never went to film school. I have a finance degree that's done nothing. I'm just kidding. But I honestly haven't used it, but business school is great. I was working for a producer, and I was always I knew I was going to work in movies. So I moved out here, from Atlanta. And when I grew up in Atlanta, it wasn't everyone filming there at that point. And so I kind of taught myself how to write, and I wrote very poorly. There were overwritten scripts. There were so much direction, just whatever. Books, and
all of our first scripts are absolutely.
Yeah, but these were like, and I would rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. But you know what? Because I love the ideas and I love the characters, but I just learned how, I would put them down for 2 years, come back, and whatever. And so that kind of started, but like way when I was a kid, I started, I wrote short stories a lot, and I wrote like choose your own adventures. Like I would run out of adventures, so I would write my own event, like addendums to my books and stuff. So when I got out to LA, I was working for producers on the indie side and on the studio side. And then I went into visual effects. And while I was there, I was in a writing group. I worked at this company that's no longer around called Rhythm and Hues. And it was a visual effects company that it was run by artists, really. And so there was a writing group, there's a music group, there was they had this thing that called ETC, which is et cetera, email the alias, et cetera, and be like, hey, I got a guitar, does anyone know how to play? Within 5 minutes, you would have like 10 people like, oh, bring your guitar, I'll teach you at lunch, and whatever. So that's where I had a really great writers group there. And everyone was interested in movies for different reasons. And so it was really kind of an odd group. And we were in a group together for like 7 years. And we now work on each other's shorts and all this kind of stuff. And I would be just rewriting stuff. And then I would write stuff with other people, just, see how that went. And I think it's been like, and it's been slower for me because I've had to have a full-time job the whole time. And then I chose to work in production. I think there's pluses and minuses to that. The pluses is like when I get something off the ground, I'm like, yes, I know everything, Like, let me do my own VFX breakdown for you, and stuff like that. But the flip side is the hours that I work, it takes me a little bit longer to get a slate of work or scripts together. But at this point, it's been over 10 years. And so, but it's been, some years have been like, I didn't write for 4 months because I was on location and I couldn't do anything, or, whatever it was. But the last 6 years have been pretty focused and baby steps forward. And,
Well, that's the thing that I love about screenwriting so much is like, doesn't matter when it happens, doesn't matter how long it takes you. You literally need your computer and your fingers. And I've interviewed people and just, there's some amazing stories like of people that I've talked to that they were, like Shawani. I'm not sure if you've heard of her from the Screencraft community, but she had a whole different career. And I mean, she was like a journalist, so it's kind of similar writing, but different career. She had 2 kids. She was in her 30s. It was not even something on her mind. And then she kind of decided she's always loved movies. And how do I get started? And she started, and like it took her years, but she ended up getting her movie on Netflix. So it's like,
that's great.
Happens, like it can happen, and it doesn't matter when we start. I think the passion which you have is like the most important thing, I was going to
and I think also too, you have to go live life in order to write about it. So
I think about that all the time. I'm like, I'm 30 now, and I've just been really getting into screenwriting the past couple of years. And I'm like, what would I have even wrote about when I was 20? Like, it would have been the most like surface level thing. Like, you need some experience under your belt,
Yeah, that's great.
I wanted to ask you about community. You mentioned it a little bit, but what is your kind of thoughts on writers groups and finding a community? This is something we like to talk about because like I feel like a lot of people kind of isolate themselves when they start writing. They don't share their scripts, they're not getting feedback. So how that community that you joined, like how integral was that for you and like really starting to find your voice and everything?
In the beginning, it was super important. I mean, you need notes, you need different perspectives, you need to be able to put it out there and see if it lands, and then if it doesn't land, ask questions again, like why? Like, I think the best notes, if you're giving notes to someone, ask like, why did you want to write this? What is the message you wanted to say? Because it's really easy to give someone notes about how you would write it. And that's not going to help them. Like you're like, what you should do is this. And it's like, nope, that's not, I wanted that other character to be the lead, whatever. And so it helped me a lot. Now I'm now at the point where I'm not in a writer's group. I just don't have time with work and my own projects and stuff. But I have 3 people that hell or high water, I will read their scripts and they will read mine. Like we trade, but I found them all through either I was in a lab with them or a writer's group, a past writer's group, or, whatnot. Just so the community is definitely there, and that's definitely important. But they're kind of my gut checks, and they're my gut checks for different things. Like one of them was really into sci-fi, one's into comedy, but they read everything of what I write, and I read everything of theirs. And we know each other's process at this point, which I think is, that takes time, and to really get to know someone's process and their work and how they work, how they approach. So I could give something in different stages to all of them, and they know kind of like, you're going to be doing this and this to it, but when you get there, make sure you follow this part, whatever. So they can give me those kind of notes. You have this shorthand, so that's really great. And occasionally you meet someone that you're like, oh yeah, let's trade work. But like the groups in the beginning, you need the accountability, like going back to what you said, like people having trouble with motivation. That's really easy to have those problems when you're starting out, because it's hard. The blank page, we're trying to fill it in. It's hard. So if you have accountability of you're meeting someone every week, you have show pages. And I've been in different groups where you had to trade full scripts. I've been in groups where put 30 pages up and it's cold read with actors reading it. I was in a group like that for 2 years, and that's like you're putting on a small play once a month. Yeah. And so I knew I had to have 30 type pages. And even if I was workshopping a script that was already written, I would take 40 pages and try to see how many I could get into 30 minutes. Like pre even arriving at the theater, I would take 35 and be like, I want the end of 35 to be on page 30. How can I lose 5 pages? Because that whole rule of move story up, keep it, or what direction lines can be minimized, and some are minimized to just because of the setting, because it's being read out loud. And then I've been in groups where everyone reads every week. It was every Wednesday, and it was 5 pages, and you had to read your own 5 pages out loud. It was only like 5 or 6 people in this group. That's what my mentor kind of ran it for a few years. So you knew it was your voice. You had to read the direction and the characters in the voice that you kind of heard them in your head. Because sometimes with the other group, when you're casting people, you're like, well, I didn't think of that. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing, So, but the other one was like, I would go every week, and sometimes I would only have 3 pages, and they're like, read them, and you get feedback. And sometimes the discussion's really not about the pages. It's the writer asking questions like, well, I don't know where to go. I don't know, what did y'all think about this? Because I really like this, but I'm thinking about going this direction, stuff like that. So all that was invaluable to me. And then that's where I met my 3 people, like in different places. And 2 of them are past Screencraft winners, but we didn't. One of those people I met at a networking thing, but it was around at the time I had won Screencraft, and they're like, oh yeah, do you know this person that was in Screencraft? And that's how Amanda and I met, Amanda Parham. And then I met Eli through one of the writing groups, and he won a couple years after me. So
awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many good things in there. Like the accountability thing, I think is huge. To have other people that it's not just you saying, oh, I'm going to finish by next week. Like there are people waiting to read it. And then do you think there is do you think there's a big benefit to reading your work out loud for other people? Like, do you think that's something everyone
I just did it the other day, a few scenes, and I made changes before I sent it to the executive. So I think I don't do the whole script, but at that point, at that juncture, yeah, I would read like 5 pages, 10 pages. And then as we got further into each script, people were like, can I bring 10 pages? And you wanted to hear it. And so, but that was a very intimate group. And so, yeah, but I think hearing your work read out loud, it is a different experience, but especially like a table read situations. And I've hosted table reads at my house on certain things. Just to hear especially if it's like a comedy and banter going back and forth, I want to hear it out loud sometimes.
Yeah.
Is it in my head? Sometimes I don't know. It just always sounds different when it's read out loud.
Definitely. So, okay, it's starting to almost get to 1:30. So
okay.
If you don't mind, I kind of would like to go back to the beginning and hear a little bit about one, how did you hear about Screencraft? That's something I always like to know. Like, how did you hear about it? What was your first impression? And then what was it like getting into the fellowship, and how has that experience helped you, if it's helped you in any way?
Oh yeah. So see, how did I hear about it? I think it was someone in my writers group at the time had entered a script. And so then I'm like, oh, what's that? And it led me to the website. And then I kind of got hooked on all the different genres. I'm like, what do I have in each genre? Like, what can I submit? And I kind of got addicted, but I think I entered the family contest, the action contest, sci-fi, TV. I was just like, I don't know, but you got notes back. I would do the coverage and get the notes back, and it was interesting to see what resonated with the readers and stuff. So I think in my statement, or like my application to the fellowship, I think I applied with 3 scripts.
Oh wow!
Because I applied because I was a semifinalist in 2 other contests. So I submitted those with my pilot, and I was like, this is why I want this fellowship. And I had participated in so many of the contests at that point that and got so much feedback back from Screencraft that I knew that's kind of, that was my goal. It's like, I want to be in your fellowship. And when so going through the fellowship, it was interesting because that's the first time I went into like studio meetings. I worked at a studio, and Screencraft scheduled a meeting with the story department. So they didn't know I was a writer up to that point. So that was kind of my, like, I'm exposing myself, like
Awesome.
coming out as a writer, to people, which is a different thing. Like when you work in one area of the business and then, coming out, and saying like, I want to be a writer, but that was cool. And Diana Asana, I think sitting down with her for 2 hours, listening to her advice was like just mind blowing. It was a one-on-one, and that was like the happiest day like of the fellowship for me. And then we had a dinner that night, and it was really great. And I found out I got into a lab that day too. So she was giving me advice about all the kind of stuff. And then later on, like years later, like I said, like Eli and Amanda and I trade notes all the time, and we were all past Screencraft winners, so they're two of my my little writer soulmates. We workshop, we shot 2 short films together, or 3 short films together. And then when I was at a crossroads a couple years ago, and I contacted Screencraft, and Tom was really gracious about helping me connect with my now manager. My manager got my work from my lawyer, Screencraft, and an executive that I had that knew him, that they all recommended him. So it was kind of funny how it was that's how I ended up at the cartel. So yeah, I mean, it's been, I think it ebbs and flows, like you kind of go away and you kind of come back, hey guys, I need some help, or or it's a community that, you meet people that are part of my kind of daily writing routine, with my friends and stuff. So,
well, I love to hear that. I mean, I think like most importantly, really, is those connections, like the friends that you've made out of it. That's like one thing that we value so much, is trying to give people a real community of people that you can actually connect with and be friends with and share your work with, because that's just one of the most important things, so I'm so glad to hear that that kind of came out of that. And then I guess last question is, or last little thing that I would love to get your thoughts on is, what advice would you have to someone who is just beginning their screenwriting journey? And maybe they've written a couple of scripts, maybe they've submitted to contests, they're not really finding any success, but they love it. What advice or any words of wisdom you would give them to just keep going and, not give up just yet?
Yeah, well, one, keep going. I mean, I think you don't get worse by writing more. So, and be open to feedback. I mean, I think, when I was starting out, I was like, no, I know my story better than anyone will know. But the thing is if it's good enough to go get made, eventually it's a collaboration of all these different departments, and then the director kind of takes it over, and you have to give your story up, and I think there's this whole thing that, and I counted recently with a newer writer that I was meeting with, that they're like, well, I don't want, should I have them sign something before they read it? I'm like, no one's, everyone can write a story about, I don't know, a ball, and it's going to be 4 different stories, like, it's like, you as your writer add the specifics to it and make it specific to you and your experience and emotional experience. And so I think finding people you trust to share your work, and really be open and not defensive about feedback, and find people that will really ask you questions and kind of be honest with it, and create an environment that they feel okay being that vulnerable to you about giving you notes. You know what I mean? Like, so, and to kind of dig in, and sometimes put something down and start a new script. And I think each time you do it, or at least for me in the beginning, it got easier to get a start, middle, and end. I think it's important to push yourself to get to the end, because you get better at sticking the landing, so to speak. Sometimes, I mean, newer writers that are like, well, I have 4 half-written scripts. I'm like, well, that's nothing. You have nothing. You need a complete story. Even if it's bad, even if it structurally doesn't work or whatever doesn't work, it's good to push yourself through the whole thing. And then when you go back to write it, then you kind of start seeing the things that need to be fixed. And about getting notes and stuff, read other scripts, read good scripts that have, of your favorite movies or, wherever, that have been made, that, and read good ones, but also read your, counterpart scripts and do detailed notes. Like, I hate when someone's like, let's trade scripts, and they give like 3 sentences. And I'm like, I gave you 4 pages, but doing notes on someone else that you're not attached to it at all, and really digging in for them, then it helps you on your own script, because you're like, oh, like, this is not matching up. Oh, this is, this act breaks wonky, or, whatever, is this not tracking? Noting that on other people's scripts cause you to notice it on your own. So it's actually helping you get better at storytelling. So I did that for years. Like, even when I wasn't writing, that was my job. I worked for a producer. So I had to read scripts and tell them what worked, what didn't work. And that kind of helped me before I even got started, I think. But if you don't, if you're not one of those jobs, it's like, there's the WGA library here, there's scripts online everywhere, but I would definitely read, but I also do notes for people, and ask them questions when you're doing the notes. Don't tell them how you would write it, and because that's part of giving good notes, but it's also, it will help your process. You don't think it's helping your process, but it will help your process.
Yeah.
And block out time to write. So that's my big thing. It's like, I knew I was really into it when I started saying no to things on the weekends. Like, I would no, like, and it's be like, I'm giving myself 4 hours on Saturday. It doesn't have to be the same 4 hours, keep your life, whatever it's going on, so you could participate in, your social stuff, but make sure, whatever it is on your weekends or your nights or whatever, set time aside that is going to be for writing. It's not going to be, I'm going to be at home and watching TV. It's like, no, I'm going to be at my desk, or, wherever you write, and make it a priority. And soon it doesn't become a scheduled thing. It's like, oh yeah, I have, doing this.
Yeah.
So
well, that is all amazing advice. I really appreciate it. Especially
no worries.
Like the giving notes on other people's scripts. I do think that is such a valuable thing. It's like analysis. It's kind of like you analyze, and then that helps you with your own stuff. So I really appreciate this.
Thank you. It's great meeting you.